Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, and this is your cannabis business podcast. We're going to dive into supply chain, challenges in the supply chain, and possible home delivery. On the line with us is Dan Chemist, our CBD correspondent with Good CBD Products.
Yeah, supply chain, chronic, big time.
Drop shipping, I would throw in there as well. We might get into that, but drop shipping is going to be huge as part of that whole supply chain. So diving into this Yahoo Finance article, talks about finding a trusted supply chain management partner to help with scalability, stability, and consistency. So this article goes on to say, quote, the best way to establish a strong supply chain to ensure consistency across the board, a streamlined supply chain fully automates the process of cannabis production and controls the environment in which different strains are grown, packaged, and manufactured. Much like how pharmaceutical companies tightly control each stage of the production, cannabis companies can also control their supply chain, the grow, the cultivation, the extraction, the manufacturing, packaging, and distribution of their products so that the customers know exactly what they're getting with the brand. So a strong supply chain can do the following. There's about 4 things that this article goes into. The first is to help a cannabis company scale without having to invest in the logical side of the business. It frees up resources to invest in machinery and technology so that the company doesn't have to move operations as it grows. So Dan, me and you were seeing a lot of investment capital up in Canada trying to automate, scale, expand multi-state operators, or whether it's Organogram rolling 40,000 joints a day. Definitely starting to see this logistical side increasing with additional resources, additional capital, technology, automation, all of that.
Yeah, it's funny because, if you're an early entry, right, and if you're not making a lot of bread, you find yourself suddenly confronting challenges like somebody with a giant new joint rolling machine, right? And again, ultimately, where the industry's going in terms of being able to consistently get the product I want as a consumer. The fact is, it's where I spend most of my time these days, is working with people who are trying to figure out how do they stabilize their sourcing.
Exactly. The second one is just that. It's quality control, a defined standard operating procedures. There's a lot of businesses I've worked with that don't have a standard operating procedure. It definitely helps to kind of get that communication flowing appropriately, as well as setting a set of expectations and just having a guideline is really important.
I was talking with a client the other day and I said, where's your SOPs? And they said, in my head. And I just laughed. I laughed, Chronic.
Yeah, that's not good. A third one is to give companies access to human capital and professional networks. So an experienced partner comes with vetted employees, important connections, as well as crucial experience and subject matter expertise. That's why a lot of angel investors and other investors look at the team to see how well connected they are. It's not just the product, but it's who's implementing. The fourth and final point is to ensure a company is always up to date with the ever-changing regulations and quality standards. It's especially important looking towards the future when you have EU good manufacturing standards and US FDA approval that will likely be a part of the picture. A lot of things change. We're starting to see right now CBD being banned in beverages and edibles. We're starting to see vape carts just being banned outright. Whether it's solvent in Oregon in 2016 that was banned. You need to have additional SKUs. You need to have a playbook, something to fall back on when these regulations slap you in the face, because it's always going to change and you need to be flexible in order to pivot to stay relevant.
Pivoting. We don't know anything about that.
The final regulatory benefit, according to this article, is, quote, actually quite significant. Cannabis products currently aren't inspected by any government quality control agency. This will quickly change once cannabis is legalized federally in the EU and US and subject to GMP, FDA, USDA review, like all other consumer and pharmaceutical products on the market. Working with supply chains that are already aware of these standards will help companies stay ahead of the curve. It's substantially easier and cheaper in the long run to invest in quality infrastructure from the beginning rather than having to retrofit manufacturing guidelines down the line. They saw this play out in California when almost half of the brands on the market were forced off the shelf when state regulators were implemented. So here's your takeaway. Regardless of whether you're manufacturing food or cannabis, your brand promises to the consumer that he or she will receive that exact same product again and again. As cannabis companies strive to brand themselves during the pre-legalization rush, ensuring the consistency of their products across the supply chain needs to be a top priority. Partnering with supply chain management companies can position cannabis companies well to be able to deliver on their brand promises. So, what are some of the biggest challenges in the supply chain for cannabis? There's rapidly scaling cannabis companies in Canada that need the following. There's 5 points that this article from supplychaingamechanger.com. The first point is that people need to scale businesses and ramp up supply chain operations without letting costs run out of control. Dan, you and I have seen businesses down near Portland, Oregon, put $1 million into a business and not make a single gram. So people need to set up logistical networks, build and negotiate supply bases, manage contracts, drive efficiencies in warehouse and distribution, and other key skills. And in some cases, companies will need to be well served by bringing on high-skilled contract employees to build out supply chains as other companies have done.
Time and again, right? Again, the whole thing of execution, ultimately.
So people who can navigate the regulatory environment around packaging and labeling, regulations and legal matters are especially complicated in the American market where cannabis is still illegal at the federal level. You and I have seen companies spend $40,000 on labeling and then it's obsolete while it's still en route. Laws change, the colors, the shapes, the font, whatever it is. And so having an on-site labeler is huge, to at least have some stickers to slap over what's irrelevant. So we definitely advise people to have an in-house labeling machine, because just the how fast things move, you become irrelevant the moment that you put in an order offshore.
Yeah, I'd get even broader than that. I'd say in-house capacity, a just-in-time mentality, and then that agile or nimble kind of business protocol or methodology, however you want to frame it. In that, again, these are the things. They're sunk costs, right? You buy a bunch of boxes and the rule change. And again, you can do that once, you can do it twice, you can do it 5 times. Well, we know companies that have had to do it 5 times. Okay, and at some point, finding a better answer makes sense. And especially, again, I always come back to war chest. Man, do you need a pile of cash to stay in the game in the cannabis industry right now? You just do.
As well as a good team with subject matter experts. So the last 2 points are just that. It's having people with specific skills for different niches of fresh products with particular shipment needs, including an understanding of cold chain distribution. And they can come from the food industry or pharmaceutical or beverage. People on the commodity management side who can negotiate the still wildly fluctuating commodity prices. That's going to be huge too. We've seen from Kush.com their future prices for hemp. So it's not just today you're looking at commodity prices, options or future prices are going to be a thing here shortly. So having somebody with that financial knowledge is going to be crucial to understand, the bid and the ask, as well as maintaining and operating that war chest. And so this final article is about supply chain and talking about home delivery. The marijuana industry is an interesting market to follow. Like any agricultural product, there's ebb and flows to supply and demand. However, there's one caveat in the cannabis industry chain that makes things a bit trickier. Cannabis products can only be sold and consumed within the state that the original plant was grown. So given that cannabis is technically illegal from a federal standpoint, bringing these plants across state lines would bring about potentially harmful ramifications. However, from a purely supply chain standpoint, the cannabis market strikes a similar delicate balance to other perishables. Luckily, unlike other fruits and vegetables, cannabis can be grown year-round, so there's no peak season for freshness, but climate changes and drought can certainly hinder production. From an actual supply chain standpoint, there are many entities that need to coexist. Cannabis, like all agricultural products, start with a seed. Companies at this stage are the first point of harvesting quality cannabis. Companies, growers, or cultivators harvest the seeds and either process the flower themselves or sell it to another entity to dry the trim and prepare the flowers. And once they've been dried, they move on to the finishing process, which can form the bud, concentrates, or edibles. And every entity that touches the product needs to be fully licensed in the state that is conducting business, and then the product moves on to a distributor. Cannabis distributors will ship the final product to a dispensary or rec shop waiting to be sold. They also mentioned a warehouse. So we don't really have drop shipping, but that's going to be a phenomenal opportunity. Maybe California or Canada will implement that. so that when a major processor is finished, it can just go to a centralized location, just like Amazon, and then be distributed to a rec shop, or even when delivery is implemented, go straight to the consumer.
That's coming. That's the thing.
Yeah, it's just going to be a matter of priorities right now. We're trying to do a few other things like cafes, but delivery is definitely going to be on the board 2020 or 2021 at the latest on a Washington state basis. I think California with ease, that's a Snoop Dogg investment. It's already there, but there's some regulations kind of hindering their expansion. So whenever new areas legalize cannabis, this whole thing is to be expected. For this reason, with a close eye on the legalization in Canada, Colorado, Washington, Nevada, they set these as blueprints for Massachusetts to put strict restrictions on the amount of cannabis a consumer could buy. So this ensured that there would be not a significant shortfall of supply. Massachusetts has also limited the number of dispensaries, and many are by appointment only to help mitigate the risk of understocks. It's kind of a monopoly that we've seen in Nevada, where the limited licenses kind of create a higher price because there's just the lack of other options, right? So it's kind of a monopoly. I'll have to see how Massachusetts handles that.
Yeah, again, the closest I get with regards to that modeling has been Vegas, and I got to say, Nevada, and the fact is, the vendors love it. As a consumer, it's a little bit rugged.
So the cannabis supply chain is big business. There's more states that look at legalizing the sale of cannabis, and that business is only going to grow. The cannabis supply chain is a complicated matter. There's multiple hands-off spots for the actual cultivation of products. This doesn't even take into account the supply chain ramifications and the market for home grow operations. Either way, the market is poised to grow. Dispensaries need to balance supply and demand, and the possibility of home delivery remains in play. Over the next few years, it'll be interesting to see how many states legalize recreational cannabis and how the federal government reacts. Another point that should be noted is having the ability to have delivery or vending machines, autonomous buying. People are so used to Amazon that no one's going to want to go in and buy suppositories or even feel weird about cannabis. People that still have that stigma themselves in a legal state are going to feel guilty or bad or whatever. So if you can remove that stigma by offering online delivery, vending machines, autonomous buying, that's going to be huge. Drop shipping, I've mentioned, is going to be big as well. And maybe that's an intermediary play for these delivery services to get to the end consumer. Regardless, I think there's going to be a huge financial opportunity. So with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out.